Hello, this is Christy here with Little Roots Ranch, and today we're gonna make a homemade pumpkin pie. But when I say homemade, I mean everything homemade. It's gonna be broken up into 3 sections. The first section is the filling, which includes pureeing the pumpkins ourselves and making the sweetened condensed milk. The second part, which is the crust and getting that ready. Those 2 things you can do in advance, which will save you a lot of time on the actual bake day. And number 3 is putting it all together and making the pie. So, super side note, I love anything pumpkin. Pumpkin spice lattes. I know, but I love them. I love pumpkin just in general. I put pumpkin in my chili year round. I can. Pumpkin, I'll have to do a video on that. I love pumpkin, and I love pumpkin pies, and I love fall. It's my favorite season. My birthday is November 1st, so it's just, everything about it is just magical, and pumpkin pie is a perfect way to celebrate that. So let's get started. So the first thing you need to do is go get your pumpkins. Now, can you use regular pumpkins? It depends. If that's the only thing you have on earth, then yeah, it'll work. The quality isn't going to be as good, but it will work. And I have done it in the past when I didn't have access or didn't have pie pumpkins, which leads us to what we need, which are pie pumpkins or sugar pumpkins. Sometimes they're called by either. They're usually slightly smaller, more likely to be sold at grocery stores, or you can grow them yourself. Obviously, that's what I do. It's fantastic. So they look kind of like this. So this one is all covered in dirt. Ooh. But it is fresh from the field. And so that's what happens. And so I've got 2 6-pound pumpkins. Well, technically one's 5.8 and one's 5.6, but that works out fine. In the end, we want to have 15 ounces of actual pumpkin puree. I like to have a little extra because my lunch or dinner tonight is going to be something pumpkin-y. Or I might dehydrate it, or I don't know. The list goes on. But you want to end up, I mentioned the 15 ounces, which is the same size as a can. Now, can you buy a can and use that instead of pureeing it yourself? Yes, you can, of course. I personally recommend doing it yourself, but I know how crazy life can get. So, but I've got these 2 pumpkins. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to first rinse them because they've got dirt on them. Then I'm going to give them a teeny little bath with vinegar just to make sure and sanitize them and get them all nice and clean. Because when you're cutting through that skin into that flesh. And any bacteria or anything like that that's on the outside is going to transfer to the inside. So I'm going to speed up that video just to make it a little easier so you're not watching me wash pumpkins. But hold on, I will be right back. Okay, so I rinsed my pumpkins, soaked my pumpkins, and now I'm ready to continue. Now again, there were 3 different parts. There's making the filling, making the crust, putting it all together. We're on the making the filling part. So I've got my pumpkin. Next, what I need to do is to get it into the oven. How do I do that? First, I'm going to cut off the top. My knives are not the sharpest, so I apologize. I'm going to set this aside because I know 3 little pigs and some chickens that will absolutely love that. Then I'm going to flip it over so it's flat side down, and then I'm going to cut it in half. My knives are not the best, so it takes me a little longer to do everything. I hope that you have a nice sharp knife. Let's see here. Voila, 2 halves of pumpkin. Then, of course, the fun part, where did my spoon, oh, here it is. Spoon, and you scoop out the insides. So I'm gonna do a fast reel of that where I do this one and the other one, and I'll pick back up when I'm done. Okay, so we've got our 2 pumpkins. Generally you can get by with just 1 pumpkin, but I always do 2 just in case, and also I love pumpkin. But I've got both of them halved, seeded, de-seeded I should say, and I've got my seeds set aside. I plan to roast those later because how amazing is that? But the next thing I'm going to do, I've already preheated my oven to 400 degrees, and I'm just going to add a little bit of oil. I use olive oil. And then just going to kind of coat that a little bit. Flip those upside down, which means cut side down. Pretty standard for all of the squashes. And these guys are going to be in the oven for about 40 minutes or until they're soft to the fork. And then I will take them out, let them cool a little bit, and I will catch you there. My hands are all oily, which is nice. My hands will be nice and moisturized. But again, just to recap, they're nice and oiled. They're gonna go into the oven for about 40 minutes, and I'll pick you up when they come out. I meant to add, I've got the pumpkins already in, my hands are so soft. I've got the pumpkins already in the oven, but I know that a lot of recipes say to put them on tin foil. I personally try not to use tin foil in our house, and so I use parchment paper for everything, and I don't use any tin foil. You can use whatever you're comfortable with, but in my demonstrations, obviously I'm using parchment paper. So I just wanted to add that. Okay, I'll pick you up when the pumpkins come out of the oven. All right, and so these babies, I think you can see the steam just came out of the oven. And as you can see, they are fork tender, which is perfect. That's exactly what I want. So what I'm gonna do is take off the skin, peel that off, and then put them into the blender, and I'll pick you up back then. Okay, so pumpkins are out. I've got my spoon, and basically all I'm doing is just taking the flesh and putting it into the blender because I will mix it up. One thing to note, if you're used to using canned pumpkin, it's important to note that homemade pumpkin tends to have more water content. And I'll get to that in a second, but what you're gonna wanna do, likely, is run the pumpkin after you get it all blended together through a cheesecloth to help remove some of the water and let it hang for a little bit. But it's an important thing, if you're used to, like I said, if you're used to making it with a can and you're not using a can for the first time, something to be aware of. I'm gonna speed up the filming so that way it doesn't take too much time and get the rest of this in there and then pulse it a few times. Okay, so I finished blending up the pumpkin puree. This stuff actually is pretty darn thick and not as watery, so I think I'm gonna be okay. Let's see, so I take out the blade, or double blades, whatever, quadruple, something like that. I'm gonna set that aside. That stuff on my hand. And then, so I've only used 1 pumpkin so far, and I'm looking for 15 ounces. 2 cups is 16 ounces, and that works just fine. So I use the highly scientific method of filling it up just below, 1 hair below or even at the 2 cup line. And then I set this aside. If you're doing this in advance, like night before, put it in the fridge or whatever. But basically, you have half of your filling. The next part, or the other part I should say, is going to, oops, did I It's a little bit over 2 cups. Still a little bit over. I was talking and not paying attention. Okay. So that looks good. I've still got some puree left. So in all reality, you only need, on average, 1 pie pumpkin. I always just make extra because why not? You know, there's so many different things you can do with it. But I've got my 2 cups of pie pumpkin and I'm ready to go for my 1 pie. If you're making multiple pies or whatever, just do additional or whatnot. Okay, so now we're gonna make the homemade condensed whipping cream, the condensed sweetened milk ourselves. Again, everything's homemade. So I don't have the burner on yet, but I've got 3.5 cups of milk, regular whole milk in here. And I'm going to add 1/2 cup of heavy whipping cream and 1 cup of sugar. Then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn that onto medium-high heat. And I've got my handy whisk here. And basically I'm gonna wait for it to warm up. I'm gonna wait for it to warm up. And once it does, then I'm gonna instantly drop it down to medium heat. We all know how milk behaves when it gets hot, so you wanna keep an eye on it. Then what I needed to do is to reduce. And that usually takes about 25-30 minutes. Stir occasionally, more than occasionally, just to make sure it doesn't stick to the bottom. But it'll reduce to about half, or also known as, excuse me, doesn't choke for a second, trying to talk and do everything. But it'll yield about 1.25 cup of sweetened condensed milk, which you'll notice is about the same size as a can. And like I said, it takes about 20 to 30 minutes. You'll know when it's done when you stir your whisk and right after it like boils violently. That's how you know. You also see like half of the volume go down. And the final way to know is that when it's at room temperature, if it's got the consistency, that thick like glue-like kind of consistency of sweetened condensed milk. So I'm gonna work on that and I'll pick you back up once this is ready. Alrighty, so as you can see, it's been simmering for about, I think it was like actually 32 minutes. My stove doesn't work as well. Usually it's about 25-30 minutes, but I put a little bit more and I've been able to see it reduce by about half, and when I stir it, it's still simmering. Obviously you don't want the heat too high because it'll burn it and that's no fun. And slow and patient wins the race or something. And so this looks ready. So what I'm gonna do is go ahead and take this off the heat, set it aside, and then we're gonna move on to the pie crust, which is exciting. Okay, so now that we've got all of the two main, or well, the 2 ingredients for the filling, which is the homemade sweetened condensed milk and homemade tomato puree, then we're ready to do our crust. So what we're gonna need is 2 cups of flour. So that's what I'm gonna get. It's important, so a few things. One, you wanna spoon in the flour. You don't wanna take the measuring bowl or measuring cup, sorry, and put it into the flour because that compacts it more than you're gonna want. The second thing is that I am using all-purpose flour. Now you can use all-purpose flour, it's what I recommend. You can use pastry flour. It's a little more delicate, a little harder to roll out and carry and stuff like that, but it will be lighter. The reason for that is the protein value in the flours. And so bread flour is going to be your highest protein level. And that's what's gonna make it thick and chewy. It's what you want in a bread or pizza dough or whatever, not so much in pie crust. So I'm just scooping these 2 cups of all-purpose flour, making sure not to push it down or mess with it too much. Oops. Close. There we go. And so I will set the flour aside for right now. Then I've got my blender again. And so what I'm gonna do is go ahead and put that in. Then I'm gonna wanna put 1 tablespoon of sugar and 1 teaspoon of salt. I already measured those out, save time. The salt, for the salt, you want to use fine grain. That's really important because you don't, the whole goal is not to have too much liquid. And you accomplish that by having something about the liquid. There isn't enough liquid to melt and distribute the salt. I don't know, just use the small, as fine of salt as sea salt as you can get. So I'm just gonna pulse it a few times. Turn the blender on first, that helps. All right, then I'm gonna add in 1 cup of, oops, dropped a little piece, cubed butter. So there, it doesn't have to be perfect, but basically 1/2 inch cubes of butter, or 2 sticks, because they're 1/2 cup each. And you want the coldest butter you can get. So I like to cut my butter, put it in the freezer. And this is important. You're gonna notice this also with the next step, is you wanna keep everything really cold. That's how you stop the interactions. Sorry, I dropped a little piece of butter. That's how you stop the interactions with, I know a lot of people are scared about pie crust, or if you haven't made one, there's a lot of hesitations and stuff, and those are all well-founded because they can create problems. But the colder your ingredients are and drier, that's really, really important. So I'm gonna go ahead and pulse a few times. And what I'm gonna look for is like little pea-sized bits. So let's see here. So I'm not trying to pulverize it. I'm definitely not trying to heat it up, but just kind of mixing it and getting little pea-sized bits. This creates little pockets when the butter melts, and it creates those little flakes from the steam. That looks about right. Let me double check. The hole on the top is missing because I have kids, and you know how that goes. Maybe 1 more pulse, and then I think we're gonna pull it out of here. 1 more. You definitely don't want to overdo it. Then I've got bowl, glass bowl. And I'm gonna, let's see here. Take this and put it in there. Make sure I got everything. Okay, let me set this aside. And grab a fork to kind of mix it. Can you see? Not really. Okay. So just kind of look at everything. I don't know if you can see kind of the pea size. There are a few chunks that are a little bigger, but for the most part, it's all mixed in. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna add cold water. How much? No idea. Well, by no idea, I mean, it isn't an exact science, basically. But you do want the coldest water. You can put ice in there, put it in the freezer. I don't have an ice maker, so I do have the old school trays. So I put a cup of water in here, and I put an ice cube tray, going old school here, and you want to slowly put the water in very, very slowly as you're mixing. And that's really, really important. And you want to intermittently knead with your hands. And I'll do that real quick. Well, actually, I'll use the time lapse because it's put cold water at just a little bit, going down the fork, mix it up, put a little bit more, mix it up, you know. Okay, so when you first start to fluff it a little bit, you'll notice that it feels like like powder, because it is, right? But then as you start adding the water, you'll see it kind of starting to stick to itself a little bit, but not necessarily, you couldn't make like a ball or whatever. Though it's getting pretty close. See there? Let me see here. Give it some good kneading. I can get a small piece to stick together, but not the whole thing. So that's where I'm gonna add a little bit, keep adding a little bit more of the ice cold water. And it'll start to get heavy. You'll notice it on the fork. It'll start to get like a, kind of like a heavy feeling and start to clump together faster. You don't want to rush into it and just dump the water in. Slowly add it. And then knead a little bit. See how it's feeling. It's feeling pretty good. I just dropped a little piece out. It's getting pretty close. Just needs a little bit more water. See how it's kind of moving together in one cohesive piece. All right. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and form it into like a little hockey disc, basically, like so, and then grab some flour, put it down, put some flour on top. Not too much, but just to keep it from sticking. And what I'm gonna do is let that rest. So I realize I don't have saran wrap, but what I do have is a Ziploc bag. And hopefully, well, maybe I should get a bigger one. Hopefully that should work. Let's see here. All right. And so with this, again, this can be done ahead of time. I've got my little disc, and what I'm going to do is put it in the fridge to rest for at least 20 minutes. Overnight works fine too. But there we have it, and I'll pick you up when this guy's coming out. We're going to work more on him. All right, so my dough has rested. There it is. And it's nice and cold, which is exactly what you want to keep it. If you find it heating up or the butter starting to melt, you want to instantly stop, get it back in the refrigerator. Now, dough is temperamental in the fact that it gets mad about everything. It gets mad if it's too warm, it gets mad if it's too thin, it gets mad if it has too much flour, it gets mad if it has too little flour, all that stuff. But basically, I'm just going to start to roll it, and each time I'm going to give it a nice little turn. Turning it about a quarter. If you find it sticking, make sure it has flour underneath it. That'll really help. And you're going to want to be rolling it out to approximately 13 inches. You want it to be larger than your pie pan, which will be 9 inches, 9.5 inches, whatever. And you want to just keep doing this over and over. You want to press in the sides to prevent any cracks, because like as mentioned, it can be fairly temperamental. And just keep rolling it out. Your end goal is that you're going to want, I'm going to add a little bit more flour, you're going to want it to be 1/4 inch thick all the way around. So I'm going to put it on fast record, and that way you can watch it. Let's see here. So as you can see here, the lighting for some reason is not helping a lot in the focus, but you can see the pieces of butter throughout the crust, and I've got it rolled out. So the next thing I'm going to do is, and I don't know if you saw in the fast record, but I already put the pan over it to make sure it was larger. So let me see. All right, so now what we're going to do is we need to transfer this pie crust into here. Now sometimes it's a little difficult to pick up. Some people will roll it. What I like to do is take it, fold it in half, teeny little bit of flour, fold it in half again, just pat a teeny little bit here. Then you take your pie pan and you put it right in the middle. And then you undo it and settle it in. You want to be mindful if the dough is springy, which means that it hasn't quite rested enough. I'm going to bring mine over a little bit. I guess I didn't center it as well as I thought I did. And of course it's going to hang over, as you can see. You want to make sure not to pull on the dough, which will stretch it, of course. But make sure that it's got adequate cover. And there it does. And you can see it's hanging over. So what you do is you take some scissors and you just cut along the excess. All right, move that to the side. Then you can fold it over. Let's see here. Or fold it under, I guess, technically. And then you want to create little flutes. So you just take your finger and you just kind of manually do it. Some pie containers have little guides. This one doesn't, but it's easy enough. That one wasn't so pretty. And you go around the whole pie. So I'm gonna quick record that, and then what I'm gonna do is put this into the fridge to let it sit a little bit to firm up, and that'll also help prevent shrinkage when it goes into the oven, because it'll actually go quite a few times at different stages to help it, help it be just perfect. Also, if you happen to have like a little tear or something, it's not the end of the world. Just go ahead and fix it with your fingers. And regardless of what it looks like, it will always have that amazing homemade pie flavor, which is ultimately the most important thing. It's awesome when it looks absolutely beautiful, but sometimes it doesn't always work out like that. All right, oops, I'm just gonna get that little piece in there. This little area is determined to not be beautiful. So as you can see here, there is the pie crust, and it's gonna go in the fridge to firm up, and I'll pick you up when it comes out. Okay, so the pie crust was in the fridge to firm up and to help with shrinkage and stuff like that. So the next thing I need to do is do a pre-bake. And what that means is it's nice and cold. I've already preheated the oven to 400 degrees, and it is preheated. And I'm gonna take this parchment paper and put it in the middle. And then I'm gonna put some rice in there. Now, you may have pie weights, you can use beans as well, but the main thing is that we want to keep the bottom flat. So I'm just spreading that out, making sure that it's getting all the corners, keep that bottom nice and flat. And then I'm gonna put it into the already preheated oven at 400 degrees for 15 to 18 minutes, and that's till the crust is dry and crisp, but not brown. This is just a pre-bake. When it comes out, I'll take that out and do it again, but just make sure everything's nice and flat. Let's see, bring you around for a better view. Where's the thing at? There. See the pie? Sorry, bad camera angle. But yeah, so basically that's gonna go in, and I'll pick you up when it comes out. All right, so I just pulled out the pie crust from the oven with the rice in it, the pie weight. Anywho, so what I'm gonna do right now is take the weight out, and I'm actually gonna pop it back in the oven, still at the 400 degrees, to pre-bake the bottom of the crust. So I'm gonna do that right now, and then I will pick you up when I bring it out of the oven. Okay, so 10-minute timer went off, pulled the totally pre-baked pie, or pie crust, sorry, out of the, out of the oven. And what I'm gonna do is let it sit until it's room temperature. And so that'll just not take too long. And as soon as it is ready, then we're gonna combine all of the ingredients and put it in for the actual pie, the best part. Now keep in mind, up until now, all of this can be done ahead in varying time frames or whatnot. But it's ready to go. I don't know if you can see the pie. It's nice and flaky already. See that bounce? I'm so excited. All right, so everything is starting to come alive with the pie, and we're in the final stages, and that's really exciting. So just to recap on all the stuff that we've done. First, we've got our pumpkin puree, and it's just pure pumpkin at this point, and we roasted it, and we have 2 cups, or just 1 hair under the 2 cups. Then we've got our made from scratch sweetened condensed milk that we made with our whole milk, heavy whipping cream and sugar, and it's nice and thick and delicious. And so we're gonna mix those, but I've got all the other ingredients that are gonna go into the filling right here. So here I have the eggs. I broke one of the egg yolks, but it's 2 whole eggs and 1 egg yolk only. So 2.5 eggs, 2.46, I'm not sure. Then over here, I've got all of our spices, and these are what is gonna go in to flavor it. So I've got, excuse me, 1/2 teaspoon of fine sea salt, and then 1 teaspoon of ground ginger, 1/2 teaspoon of ground cinnamon, 1/4 teaspoon of ground cloves, and 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. And so I've got everything out here ready to go, and so these together will be our yummy filling. So first thing to do is to put the pureed pumpkin in with our sweetened condensed milk. Oh, I'm so excited. The house smells so amazing, and I know once this pie is baking and those herbs and spices, whew. Okay, so I've got the pumpkin added, and then I'm going to go ahead, oops, this little piece here, and go ahead and get that whisked in a little bit. Yummy, yummy. All right, and then I'm going to add my 2½ or two whole eggs, 1 only egg yolk. Put that in. Those are from our chickens, of course. They're not laying much right now because they're molting, but that's okay. And then I'll give that a little whisk. Get that mixed in there. Then I'm going to get the spices all mixed in there. And again, that sea salt, ginger, clove, cinnamon, and nutmeg. I always forget. The molding spices are just, you can put whatever you like. That's what I personally like. And so I'm just going to go ahead and add all those in. And continue to whisk those in. Oh, this is going to smell so good. I know that it's a lot of stuff to do, but nothing compares to homemade, fully homemade, everything from scratch. Oh, I can smell the spices. So good. Pumpkin pie. And again, I know I've said it quite a few times, but most of this stuff can be done in advance, which is really nice. So on bake day, whatever that may be, you can just throw it together and pop it in the oven. One thing I've done, so our pie crust that we pre-baked is still getting to room temperature, and that's really important. You don't want to put the stuff in it while it's warm at all. So it's still doing that. So I'm going to have to wait on that. But what I did in the meanwhile was set the oven to preheat at 325 degrees. And as soon as that temperature, or the oven's already preheated, as soon as that crust, which it's getting really, really close, as soon as it gets to room temperature, I'm just gonna pour this in and put it in for an hour to an hour 25 minutes. Wait the long time for it to cool, and then enjoy some pumpkin pie. So I'll pick you up when I'm pouring the mix in, or the filling into the pie. So I've got, finally, I felt like it waited forever, but my pie, my flaky, buttery pie crust is room temperature, which is excellent because that means that it's time to add my mix, which is one of the parts, obviously, I'm most excited about. Oops, almost dumped it everywhere. That would have been great. So I should go ahead and pour it in here. Obviously making sure not to overfill it. I feel like that should be good. Looks like I got a little extra. And oh, that looks so amazing. Then what I want to go ahead and do is just tamp it a little bit and jiggle it. And basically that's just making sure that any air bubbles that are in there are going to be dislodged. Now the only thing left to do is get this delicious pie into the oven. So as mentioned earlier, I've already preheated the oven and it's already at temp of 325. And so I'm going to put this pie in there, and it's going to be in there for between an hour and 25 minutes. My oven is a little wonky, so sometimes I go a little longer, but I'm going to get that in there and wait for it. And when it comes out, test it and make sure it's done. And of course it needs to wait till it's at room temperature again, which is going to take even longer than the crust until you can cut it up, unless you just don't care. For optimal quality though, let it cool down. So I'll see you when this bad boy comes out of the oven. One thing I forgot to mention is I've got this super high-tech fancy kitchen gadget known as parchment paper cut into a 0 or O or whatever. Anywho, as I mentioned earlier, I don't use tin foil, and so that means I don't use tin foil around the crust of my pie. With that, I also don't have one of those pie guards or things. I need to pick one up, but I don't have one. So what I use, which helps a little bit to keep it for the crust or the outside crust from burning, is I place the parchment paper. Watch it give me problems. Let's see. I just place it around there like so, and then ever so gently push it into the oven. But anyways, same thing, oven's at 325. This is going for an hour to hour and 25 minutes, and I'll see you on the other side. So exciting news. I went ahead, like I said earlier, my oven is terrible. So I went the whole hour and 25 minutes and actually went about 10 minutes over. And I looked at my pie and it looks absolutely beautiful. So I did the test. I got a toothpick and I put it in through the middle, pull it out so that, and check to see if anything sticks, and it didn't. So that means this pie is ready. Well, kind of. Basically, it has to sit and it has to reach room temperature, which sounds terrible because I hate waiting, but that's okay. I'll just have to watch some TV or something and then be able to eat a nice slice of pie when it is ready. Thank you. I hope that I shared enough and all information. If I didn't, please below drop any questions, comments, concerns. If you think I did something wrong, please let me know. I'd love to learn. I'm still my gardening level here, my pie making level, mid-range. So love to see your tips and happy pie making.